can hear me? Nice. Okay, great. I believe most of you here in the room can agree with me that decentralized finance is still a very dangerous place to be in. Even if we just look at the recent events, starting from the last summer, when Terra Luna happened, followed by the FTX crash, we had then the USDC DPEG happening in combination with the Silicon Valley Bank, and lastly, also the Euler hack, which reminded us basically how dangerous the space is. And we should ask ourselves, why is this happening? I mean, we have those companies who are doing the security assessment, like auditors, on one side. We have, on the other side, companies who are focusing on the economical side, mostly on the protocol development side, and yet these events are repeating constantly. And I believe a more important question is actually, when we look all these projects in DeFi, they are like mostly 2 to 5 years old. So basically, unproven projects manage to attract almost billions in capital. And we should ask ourselves, what is the criteria for those people who deploy their capital to these protocols? And when we look now DeFi, I believe the idea was to build an open, transparent, more secure financial system, alternative to the traditional finance space. And yet what we have today, it's a worse version of that, because those kind of events are not happening in TradFi. And if DeFi should go mainstream, we have to rethink how the current space is working, especially around the risk. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce myself. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Solidity Network. I spent most of my career in corporate development, working for major German corporations like Audi, ZF, or E.ON. I'm in crypto since 2016, mostly working on the DeFi side. Solidity Network was co-founded beginning of the last year. We closed our first financing round in September of last year, and since then managed to build a team of 18 people, out of which 14 are working on the development side. We are headquartered in Munich and have also offices in London and Zagreb. So let's try to understand why do we have these kind of events. And let's just take a very, very simple example here. I believe most of you know these strategies which were very popular in the last bull run. So basically you have your stable coins and you put it on some of those protocols working to get additional yield. In this example, we have two lending protocols. On one side Aave and the other side Compound. And what is actually the mainstream doing? What was the mainstream doing? How was the allocation happening to those protocols? Most of them were just looking at these liquidity pools, looking at the yields, checking where is the highest opportunity, and in accordance to that, move their capital there. In this case, Aave is 7%, Compound is 9%, so basically they moved their stablecoins to Compound. I guess most of you hopefully can agree with me, this is not the smartest way to deploy your capital. Why? Because you're not taking the risks in account. What are the risks behind Aave? What are the risks behind Compound? A better way of capital allocation would be actually to look the risk-reward ratio. So basically taking the risks, taking the reward, calculate the ratio, and then in accordance to that, deploy your capital. And now we are coming actually to the problem of DeFi. When we look at those protocols here, we have actually also the chains, because Aave is, for example, on Ethereum, of course, Compound also, but it can be also on other chains, for example, Avalanche, and you have to take this also in account. Between the chain like Ethereum and the protocol, there is usually a L2 solution because of scalability issues, like, for example, Arbitrum. And that basically describes the inner working of DeFi. Basically, DeFi is nothing else than a composite of various primitives. And actually, the thing is much more complicated, because this is a very simplified version of how DeFi is working. We actually have over 100 protocols, and they are all interconnected. In this case, we can also take the bridges in account, especially if there are some kind of cross-chain strategies in place. we have to take the oracles in account, because for the correct working of these lending protocols, real data is also needed, and oracles are providing that. And then on top of that, we have then yield aggregators, yield optimizers, who are moving the capital in accordance to a predefined strategy. Now the thing is, like, all these primitives here I mentioned have their underlying dynamics, their underlying risks. And basically this is looking like this. So basically, when we start just with the chain, we have governance structures. How much decentralization is there? We have validators, slashing events happening. We have consensus mechanisms who are vary from chain to chain. Then on top of that, L2 comes with their governance structure, with the sequencer. Then the DeFi protocol, besides the smart contract issues we all know, we have to take care also about possible liquidation events happening there. There are liquidity pools. You get inside, you are actually not sure you are able to get outside of it. And then on top of that, you have all these yield optimizers, yield aggregators who are bringing additional security issues and additional centralization. If then bridges are involved, then you have finality of one chain, the finality of the second chain, and the bridge is basically making the whole situation, basically picking the worst of these two. Of course, and lastly, you have oracles with their data feed inconsistencies. So basically, a lot of those attacks happen through the oracle side. And the recent discussions we have on the innovation side on the consensus mechanism, like shared security, risk-taking, and so on, is going to magnify even more all this oracle side. And so basically what's happening here is if one of those protocols breaks, like for example Compound, it will affect immediately the other primitives. Like immediately we will see some kind of consequences on Aave, like liquidation events, some other protocols are going to be affected. And the question is like, how is possibly a user able to get grasp what kind of risks is he taking when he deploys his capitals? When we look at the current space and when we look at these risks, so basically those risks I described to you are nothing else than technical fundamental risks which are unknown in the traditional finance space. So basically there is no real framework, standardization how to deal with them. Current solutions on the market who are trying to grasp that are usually very simple, static and subjective. So a very simple case is basically how they assess smart contract risks. They are just looking, is the smart contract audited? For how long is smart contract deployed? Was it ever hacked? And that's it. On the other side, all this stuff here is happening like dynamically. Like we cannot just take the smart contract into account. All these liquidation events changing like from one event happening to the other one. And that's basically where Solidity networks come in. We are using a big data approach. So basically by quantifying the risk in real time through indexing and monitoring of the whole ecosystem, starting with the L1, L2 chain, with the DeFi protocols, stablecoins, bridges, oracles, including the liquidity pools. We are focusing on the fundamental side of the risk, so basically gathering data around security, around liquidity flows, decentralization governance, social and development activity, and enabling our customers to build risk-related product out of it. And the most important feature is, of course, that those outputs should be like in real time. We are also aware if those solutions should be also used on the DeFi space, we have to decentralize the tech stack because we want to help these DeFi protocols to be like more advanced and not to be a tech vector on them, as it could be the case. So basically, how should this be solved? This is a very high-level overview of our architecture. Just don't be like scared about that. It's actually very simple. So basically, in the first step, what we are doing is like we are running our own nodes by gathering the on-chain data and through our data pipeline and running Lambda functions to get the off-chain data. And what we learned from discussions with many protocols to enable decentralization of the tech stack, we had to rethink the whole idea of what does it mean decentralization. And the reason for that is basically most of these projects are in a different stage of decentralization. and it's even more interesting, most of them have a different understanding of decentralization. And it's getting even more funnier when you start to talk about the cost benefits, when they realize that decentralization has to be paid. Then we understood, okay, let's provide a solution for all of them to get their own way of route how they want to decentralize. What does it mean? So basically they can decide, do they want to have a centralized way of getting the data or decentralized? Do they want to, are they fine with centralized immutable databases, or do they want to have decentralized storage solutions integrated in their data flow? How should the computation done? Is it off-chain computation enough, or do they need some kind of decentralized network on that side? And basically, the whole route is given to them. On top of that, we are going to enabling, like running various algorithms from statistical models, network analysis, up to machine and deep learning models, depending on the use case they want to build. And what we learned from our customer discussions, what these solutions are usually used for example, customizable risk costs, which update itself in real time. They are used for portfolio rebalancing and vol strategy rebasements. This could be like risk frameworks for insurance protocols or liquid staking, or just a monitoring or alerting system in place if there is, for example, a new ecosystem chain involving, or on a TradFi trading infrastructure in place. And basically the output is, of course, through APIs if the protocol of the customer is comfortable with that, but it can be also through oracles if he is more on the decentralized way around. And here are these customers I mentioned before. So basically on the DeFi side, these are mostly like on-chain asset managers, like yield aggregators, yield optimizers, who are dealing with liquidity provision. Insurance protocols, decentralized exchanges, but also protocols we don't know at the moment. And actually the idea is to open up the platform. That was actually just the first part what we built, but the idea is like also to incentivize data providers to provide unique data which we don't have, which are necessary to build those advanced risk frameworks. We also want to incentivize these routes, so basically as more customers are using a very specific route, as cheaper it's going to be in the end. We are also going to incentivize third-party providers of models. What does it mean? For example, if we want to have also agent-based simulation models, there are companies who can integrate their processing infrastructure into our solution to build like even more advanced solutions out of that, basically getting the outputs from here, combining with these models to get something totally unique on the risk side. And lastly, we are going to incentivize everyone to build risk-related frameworks, and basically also with the idea to capture use cases we are not aware at the moment. And all of this is going to be like paid to the customer through a consumption-based model. From experience of other protocols in the space, we understood from the beginning it's not really a smart idea start from day one with decentralizing the tech stack and opening up the platform. So we said, okay, let's build a centralized solution. The first part, provide immediate value and capture these customers who are fine with the centralized case. And I'm happy to announce that we managed to build our beta solution, which is now live with our first paying customer. And it's now going to improve like even more with our 30 design partners. How does it work? We made it like from the day one as user experience most important thing. It should be like as easy as possible. So basically if there is no knowledge about risk, that they can build a very simple risk framework, in this case block split risk framework from the conference a week ago. The idea is like basically he just selects the primitives he's working on, and out of that a default risk model should be deployed without thinking what's happening. So basically these default risk models are trained by ourselves, and our approach is basic to build various risk models using various methodologies on security side, liquidity side, with sub-scores, and this overall score can be then combined out of those, depending on the formal user is fine. In this case, it was the average. Then if the user wants to optimize a little bit without going too deep in the knowledge, he can change the weighting factors of these sub-models to get an even more unique case for his use case. And lastly, if the end customer has domain knowledge, expertise in DeFi space, he can go on the parameter list, he can change the weighting factor of every single input parameter for those models to get something more unique on his side. Of course, these models, which we deployed, are going to be open, so basically he can then optimize on that side. And lastly, also the models are going to be adjustable in the second piece. As I mentioned, we are now live. From here on, we are now going in a direction opening up the platform that third-party providers can provide the data, build advanced risk frameworks, but also decentralizing tech stack with the idea to launch our product in mid of November at DevConnect in Istanbul. So when we look at the market space at the moment, I mean, there are a lot of these risk-related companies. And so basically, this is our definition. We know there are many companies who are focusing on the protocol design, like companies focusing on the security side of the protocol, companies focusing on the economics of a protocol, yet the liquidity provision, the capital provision is not really addressed in a right way. We know companies on the econometrical side, these are usually companies who have a team from traditional finance and they are trying to build these models in the DeFi space. And that's basically this field where we are is, in our opinion, underserved, is basically this newly introduced risk category, like at the fundamental side of the risk, where Solidity is focusing on. As I mentioned, we're targeting the DeFi space, liquidity provision, and the traditional finance space, mostly hedge fund managers. We launched our product with the 30 design partners, and if any of you here in the room is willing to test our solution, just ping me after the talk. And just to conclude, I believe the tweet from Dan Mohet still in time. This was from the last year. So basically, the DeFi in current form is going to change, and we believe risk management is going to be like major driver of this change, and Solidity Network is going to enable that. Thank you.
Cool. So do we have any questions for Marijo from the audience?
Hi. Kirill, we're actually developing kind of competitive solution, but we started with the end user Chrome extension, also to train a model. I'm curious, so how do you plan to integrate with the DeFi projects? So because you mentioned that it's going to be like Oracle and API, and so what's going to be the main focus?
I believe this is like really depending on the customer. Like you did probably also your customer discovery, and you will learn that some DeFi protocols are very sensitive how they get the data and how deep they want to go inside of that. Some of them are comfortable with APIs if they just want to have this information in the front end. It's a really BD topic, and we build this infrastructure routing layer with the idea that we can provide this decentralization, depthness, depending on the use case they are following. And in the end, I believe the most interesting part is going to be once they realize the cost of a decentralization, what route they are going to pick up.
So I have a question. What will decentralization look like for Solidity?
Decentralization for Solidity, I mean, we are going to build this overarching layer to enable that all these primitives come together on the middleware side. So basically, we are not going to build storage solutions. We are not going to build decentralized computing networks. We are not going to build like triggering solutions of all these primitives and oracles, but we are going to bring them together, and we are going to focus mostly on the incentivization side, enabling that all these primitives working together in a right way. And that means, of course, we are going to create that entity, opening up the platform, create governance structures, but this is like a process which has to be happen over time. So that's the reason why we are very careful around that.
And so what is your risk assessment for MiCA and other regulation that we're starting to see spark up in the space? What sort of time frame do you see that you have to build out before potential regulation is an issue for Solidity?
We are aware of that. So basically, we started with all the spontaneous thinking from the day one about those kind of topics. I believe the most important topic is going to be like the utility, what you're building behind this structure. And we have this centralized case, so basically we can create onboard customers, create revenues on that side. And once this incentivization part comes, from the legal side it's solved, but we have to see how this all is going to evolve. So basically it's going to be like the company in this form, as it now is going to change, of course. It's going to be a network, and we are over that and we're building on that side.
Great. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Just the last question. If you have questions, there was a QR code. Feel free to join our Telegram group and ask questions there.
So we have 5 minutes until our next speaker.